I paid for my parents' entire retirement home renovation myself, $275,000 that I'd been quietly setting aside for 4 years, and when I finally drove up to surprise them on the day they signed their last mortgage payment, my brother's truck was already in the driveway. A woman I didn't recognize was sitting at the kitchen table with a leather portfolio open in front of her, and my mother was standing at the sink with her hands wrapped around a mug she wasn't drinking from. My name is Claire. I'm 32. I work in real estate contract law, which means I spend most of my professional life reading documents that are designed to look generous while quietly shifting control from one party to another. I know which clauses hold under pressure, and which ones were written to dissolve the moment someone with a financial interest decides to test them. I didn't choose this work randomly. I chose it because I watched my parents spend 30 years building something carefully, and I wanted to understand the language people use when they try to take careful things apart. My father retired from the railroad 2 years ago, after a back injury that left him with chronic nerve pain down his left side. He doesn't complain about it. He's the kind of man who will describe significant physical discomfort as a little stiff today and then go outside to rake leaves for 2 hours. My mother has quietly managed everything around him, his medication, his follow-up appointments, the way she rearranges the furniture so he doesn't have to twist awkwardly to get out of his chair. She does all of this without making it visible, without making him feel managed. Their house in western Pennsylvania had been their home for 28 years. A narrow 2-story on a tree-lined street with a yard my father had landscaped himself over decades. A kitchen my mother knew the way she knows her own handwriting. A back porch where they had their coffee every morning for as long as I could remember. The house had never been updated past approximately 1,994. The stairs were steep. The master bathroom had a tub-shower combo my father could no longer use safely. The back door had a lip that caught his foot twice last winter. The heating system was older than I was. I started planning the renovation when my father came home from physical therapy and said, quietly and without looking at either of us, that the therapist had mentioned something about single-floor living eventually. He said it like it was a weather forecast for somewhere far away. My mother looked out the window. I looked at my father. Nobody said anything else about it. I hired a contractor I'd worked with professionally for 3 years, a woman named Sandra whose firm handled accessibility retrofits and residential restoration both. I told her what I needed. A first-floor master suite added to the back of the house where the sunroom had been. A walk-in shower with no threshold, grab bars integrated into the tile design so they looked intentional rather than medical. Widened doorways throughout the first floor. The back door rebuilt from the frame out, level with the porch. A kitchen counter section lowered and reinforced. New heating and electrical throughout. The yard regraded so the path from the driveway to the front door was even. I did not tell my brother. My brother's name is Tommy. He's 5 years older than me, lives 40 minutes from our parents, and has the quality of believing himself to be the default authority in any room he's in without having done the work that earns that. He has a good heart in the way that a compass has a needle it will point somewhere, but that doesn't mean it'll take you where you need to go. His wife, Renee, is sharper than he is and has always understood that my parents' house, paid off after 26 years, represented the only significant asset in the family. I structured the project carefully. I pulled the permits under my name. I drew up a deed amendment and placed the property into an irrevocable life estate, naming my parents as life tenants with full rights of occupancy, use, and quiet enjoyment for the remainder of their lives. No transfer, no encumbrance, no commercial use without their written consent. I funded the renovation entirely from my own savings and a low-interest personal loan I'd taken against my retirement account. I prepaid their property taxes for 8 years and set up a household maintenance account with a standing balance. I did this because my father once told me, when I was about 14, that the only thing that let him sleep at night was knowing that if something happened to him, the house was paid off and my mother would always have somewhere to go. He said it like it was the whole point of everything he'd been working toward. I decided a long time ago that I wanted to make sure it stayed that way. The renovation took 11 months. I drove out every other weekend to check progress. Sandra sent weekly photo updates. I told my parents the work was a surprise for their retirement and that they needed to stay with my aunt in Ohio for 2 months while it was completed. I told them I was handling a renovation project and that the house needed some updates for accessibility. I did not tell them the scope. I did not tell them the cost. The day I drove them back, my mother kept saying she didn't understand why I was going this way. This isn't the highway. I know, I said. We're taking the scenic route. My father sat in the passenger seat and watched the landscape and didn't ask questions. He has always trusted me with logistics. When we turned onto their street, my mother recognized it before I did. She sat up straight. She said, "Claire, what did you do?" Not a question. More like something falling into place. I parked in the driveway. The front path was new flagstone, level and wide. The landscaping my father had planted over the years had been preserved and built around. The exterior had been repainted in the same color they'd always had, just fresh. The porch railing was replaced but matched the original style. My father got out of the car and stood at the edge of the new path and looked at the house for a long time without saying anything. Then he walked to the front door, no hesitation, no favoring his left side the way he does on uneven ground, and put his hand on the door frame and just stood there. My mother was beside me with her arm through mine. She said, "How long have you been planning this?" 4 years, I said. She made a sound that wasn't a word. We spent the first weekend going through every room. My father stood in the new first-floor bathroom and ran his hand along the grab bar and said it looked like something from a nice hotel. My mother reorganized the kitchen twice and cried once in the hallway when she thought I wasn't nearby. On Sunday morning they had coffee on the back porch, which was now level with the yard, no stairs. I watched them from the kitchen window. My father had both hands around his mug, and his face was toward the sun, and he looked, for the first time in a long time, like a man who was not managing anything. I drove back to Pittsburgh that afternoon with the kind of quiet inside me I don't have a better word for. I thought I had protected something. I thought the structure was solid. I was right about one of those things. My mother mentioned the renovation to Tommy during a phone call the following week. She could not contain it. She has never been able to hold happiness inside herself when she's genuinely feeling it. She told him about the master suite and the new bathroom and the porch. Tommy asked for photos. She sent them. He called me 2 days later. His voice had that particular warmth it gets when he's already decided something and is now managing my reaction to it. He said, "Claire, this is incredible. You really did something special here." I said, "Thank you." He said, "Have you thought at all about the long-term picture?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I've been talking to Renee about this, and we think there might be something worth exploring in terms of the equity position, especially given the improvements, and I wanted to run some thoughts by you before I mentioned anything to Mom and Dad." I said, "Tommy, what are you talking about?" He said he'd put together some numbers. I said, "Send them to me." He said he'd rather talk through it in person. I said, "I'll call you back." I didn't call him back that week. I told myself he was exploring, not planning. I told myself he hadn't said anything to our parents yet. I told myself the legal structure was clear. Then my mother called me on a Wednesday evening, and her voice was doing the thing it does when she's carrying something she doesn't know how to set down. She said Tommy and Renee came by today. She paused. They brought someone with them, a woman. She had a briefcase. She paused again. Your father and I didn't really understand what she was explaining, and I told her we needed to talk to you first. I asked if they'd signed anything. There was a silence long enough to tell me. My mother said, it was just an exploratory document. Tommy said it was just to get things started. It was a limited liability company formation agreement. My parents had signed as members. I was in my car within the hour. I knew before I reached the street. Tommy's truck was in the driveway. Renee's car was behind it. There was a third car I didn't recognize, a gray sedan, parked at the curb. Through the front window I could see Tommy standing in the living room, talking with his hands. My father was in his chair. He was not talking. My mother met me at the door. She looked relieved and guilty at the same time, which is an expression I have only ever seen on her face when she knows she has made an error and is not sure yet how large it is. She said, "I'm sorry, I didn't know it would get to this point this fast." The woman with the briefcase was still at the kitchen table. She introduced herself as a business consultant. She had a reorganization summary in front of her, a 3-page document with a cover sheet that had an LLC name printed at the top, a family name followed by the word holdings. The structure transferred equity in the property into the LLC, named Tommy and Renee as managing members, and included a clause that gave managing members authority over leasing decisions. Tommy came into the kitchen. He put his hand briefly on my shoulder the way he does when he's decided he's being generous. He said, "I know you put a lot into this. I want to be clear, we're not diminishing that at all. This is just about making sure the asset is working for the whole family." I set my bag down on the counter. I said, "What asset?" He said, "Come on, Claire. The property value went up significantly with the renovation. We'd be stupid not to think about what it could generate." Renee was leaning in the doorway. She said, "It's about planning for the future." I said, "Whose future?" My father said, from his chair in the living room, "Tommy, I told you I didn't understand this document before I signed it." His voice was even. He said it like a fact, not a complaint. Tommy said, "Dad, that's what we're here to explain." My father said, "I'd like Claire to explain it to me." I asked the consultant to give us a few minutes. She looked at Tommy. He nodded. She gathered her portfolio and went to sit on the front porch. I went to my bag. I have a habit that started in my first year of practice. Every significant transaction in my life, professional or personal, gets the same documentation treatment. I brought the full file. I placed the first document on the kitchen table in front of Tommy. The deed amendment, recorded with the county courthouse 8 months prior, establishing my parents as life tenants with full rights of occupancy and quiet enjoyment for the remainder of their natural lives. I read the relevant section aloud. No transfer, no encumbrance, no commercial use of any kind, without the express written consent of both life tenants. Any instrument purporting to transfer or encumber the property without that consent is void. Tommy looked at it. He said, "The LLC agreement supersedes a life estate. A good attorney can restructure this." I placed the second document in front of him. A written legal opinion from a property rights attorney in Allegheny County confirming that a properly recorded life estate takes precedence over any subsequently signed member agreement in an LLC where the underlying asset was never validly contributed to the LLC because the signatories did not hold unencumbered title. The LLC formation, she had noted, was likely void from the moment it was signed. Tommy looked at Renee. I placed the third document on the table. It was the LLC formation agreement itself. The one my parents had signed. I had obtained a copy through the county business registry that morning. I had highlighted paragraph 7, subsection C, which granted managing members the authority to enter into lease agreements of any duration without further member approval. I set beside it a printout of a short-term rental platform listing draft status, not yet live for a property matching the address and description of my parents' house. The account was registered to Renee's email address. Renee straightened. She said, "That was preliminary research." I placed the fourth document on the table. The county ordinance governing short-term rentals in residential zoning districts in their municipality. Special use permit required. Safety inspection required. Neighbor notification required. 30-day minimum processing window. No application had been submitted for this address. Violation fines began at $5,000 per incident and escalated with each subsequent occurrence. The kitchen was quiet enough that I could hear the consultant shifting on the porch steps outside. I placed the fifth document on the table. A cease and desist addressed jointly to Tommy and Renee, drafted by my firm the previous evening, formally notifying them that any further attempt to encumber, lease, list, photograph for commercial purposes, or misrepresent ownership of the property would be treated as tortious interference with the life estate and pursued accordingly. It was copied to my firm's senior partner. It referenced the LLC formation as a potential fraudulent conveyance and noted that a formal complaint had already been submitted to the state bar regarding the consultant's role in soliciting signatures on a document that purported to transfer an asset the signatories did not hold clear title to. Tommy stared at the table. The warmth had left his face entirely. He said, "This is our parents' house, Claire." I said, "Yes, and their names are on the deed. Mine isn't. Yours isn't. Renee's isn't. And nothing signed at this table this afternoon changes that." I looked at my father. He was watching me from his chair. I said, "Dad, you don't have to sign anything you don't understand. You never did." He said, "I know that now." I told Tommy and Renee they needed to leave. I told the consultant the same thing, and added that she was welcome to review the cease and desist before advising any future clients on similar arrangements. Tommy said, "You're going to blow up this family over paperwork." I said, "The paperwork exists because I anticipated this conversation." Then, I held the front door open. What followed was not graceful. Tommy stood in the driveway for 20 minutes making phone calls. Renee sat in their truck without speaking to him. The consultant left first, without saying goodbye to anyone. Eventually both vehicles backed out and turned down the street and disappeared. My mother made tea. She sat down across from me and held her mug and didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "I should have called you before I let them in." I said, "You didn't know." She said, "I think I knew something wasn't right when she opened that briefcase. I just didn't want to believe it was what it looked like." I said, "I know. She said, "He's your brother." I said, "I know that too." My father came to the kitchen and sat at the head of the table. He looked at the documents still spread out in front of us. He said, "Did you prepare all of this ahead of time?" I said, "Not all of it. I had the deed and the legal opinion already. The rest I put together after Mom called me Wednesday." He nodded slowly. He said, "You knew this was coming." I said, "I thought something like it might." He said, "And you didn't tell us." I said, "I didn't want you to spend 4 years waiting for something to go wrong." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That was considerate." He said it plainly, without irony. The way he says things he means exactly. I had a security camera system installed the following weekend. 4 exterior cameras, motion activated, feeding to an app on my phone and a tablet mounted in the kitchen. I walked my parents through how to use it. My father stood beside me while I tested the angles. He watched the live feed cycle through on the kitchen screen. He said, "I spent my whole working life making sure I wasn't a burden on anyone." He paused. I thought that was the right thing to do. I said, "You were never a burden." He said, "I know that now too." He said it like he was just beginning to believe it. 3 weeks later, my mother called me on a Sunday morning. She said a man she didn't recognize had rung the bell and handed her a letter. The return address was a property management company. The letter proposed a meeting to discuss rental management services for the property. I asked if she had touched anything else in the envelope. She said there was also a signature page with my parents' names pre-filled. I told her to put everything in a bag and not touch it. I pulled up the exterior camera on my phone and got the man's license plate from the footage. I texted it to Tommy with the still image attached. The message I sent said only, "I have this on camera. The cease and desist is on file with the county and with my firm. I suggest the person you sent leave before I make a second call to the property management company's licensing board." The reply came back in 4 minutes. "Wrong house. Sorry for the confusion." By the time I called the county non-emergency line to report a solicitation incident, the car was already gone from the street. Tommy sent me an email 6 weeks later with the subject line, "Can we talk?" It was 4 sentences. He said he'd handled things poorly. He said he hadn't meant for it to go the way it did. He said he thought there might still be a way to have a conversation about the future when things had calmed down. He said he hoped I understood he had their best interests at heart. I read it twice, moved it to a folder labeled correspondence, and did not reply. Renee texted my mother the following month with a message about getting together for the holidays. My mother forwarded it to me and asked what she should do. I told her that was entirely her decision, and that whatever she decided, I would support. She did not reply to the text. My parents still have their coffee on the back porch every morning. I know this because my father sends me a photo on the weekends, the yard, the light, the 2 mugs on the railing, and the message underneath is usually just one word: good. I drive out about once a month and we eat on the porch and watch the light change over the back fence, and nobody manages anyone. My mother reorganizes the kitchen pantry on a cycle I have stopped trying to track. My father showed me last visit that he had started a small vegetable garden in the raised beds Sandra built along the back fence, the path between the beds exactly wide enough for a person to move comfortably without stepping down. What I understand now, that I had wrong for a long time, is that I spent years believing love meant staying invisible. That if you did something genuinely for someone, you announced it through the quality of the doing, and never through the defending of it. What I know now is that building something real sometimes means standing between it and the people who see it as raw material. That is not a betrayal of love. Sometimes it is the most direct expression of it. My father is still a man who will call significant pain a little stiff and go rake the leaves anyway. But he walks to the mailbox now without favoring his left side. He uses the shower in the new bathroom every morning. He told me 2 months ago, out of nowhere, while we were looking at the vegetable beds, that he used to lie awake some nights thinking about what would happen to the house. He said he didn't do that anymore. He said he wasn't sure when exactly that stopped. He looked at the garden for a moment. Then he said, "I think it stopped when I understood that someone had already thought it through." If you have ever spent years quietly protecting something that mattered to someone you loved, and then stood in a room while someone tried to convince you that protecting it was the same as withholding it, you already know what that moment costs, and what it's worth. The 2 things are not the same. They never were.